latest Statistics SA data indicates that the unemployment rate fell by 0.3% to 32.6% in the second quarter of 2023. Earlier in the week, Stats SA released a quarterly labour force survey. The National Minimum Wage Commission is calling for public submissions for the increases for 2024. Youth Development Agency African Tikkun Services warns that increasing the minimum wage could have unintended consequences on the employment sector. Onyi Nwaneri, CEO of African Tikkun Services, joins us now to take this conversation further. Onyi, good afternoon. Lovely to speak to you today. Now, there are many who will say to you, what in heaven's name are you talking about when you say that there should not be an increase in minimum wages?
Thank you, Hugo, for having me, and thank you to your listeners. If you look at, we already have gains in employment. We have seen employment grow by 0.3%, which is something to celebrate, which means that as Africa Tikkun Services, we really applaud everyone who created jobs in the last quarter. But at the same time, we need to recognize that we've had a very tough quarter. We've had high inflation. We've had interest rates increased in the last 6 months. And there have been huge challenges for employers of labor. And we're in the middle of it because as Africa Tikkun Services, we enable young people become economically empowered. We help facilitate economic empowerment for young people. Who are those who create the most jobs in the South African economy? It is the formal economy, which is the corporate sector, and the small, medium enterprises that do so. The more we try and put pressure on them in terms of now increasing the national minimum wage, which we said is about a balance, not just about, we're not saying we don't want the national minimum wage to be increased. What we're saying is that we want to look at a balance because there's a lot of pressure on the people who create jobs at the moment. And the more pressure on them, the less jobs we're going to create.
Now, Onyi, sorry, I beg your pardon, something that you also speak about when you talk about the balance is the implications of an increase in the minimum wage and the likelihood of the unemployed, who are predominantly young people, being employed. Bring that into context.
No, absolutely. So from a context point of view, we have all agreed that the highest employers of labor, or who not just are the highest employers of labor, or the most has the most potential to create employment is small, medium enterprises. Small, medium enterprises are currently under pressure. As Africa Tikkun Services, when our intention is not just to help young people to become economically empowered by facilitating economic empowerment of youth, we also work very closely with small, medium enterprises. Small, medium enterprises can hardly afford to create jobs. In fact, they are currently supported through programs like YES, programs like, the National Youth Service to put young people in their businesses. So if we want to create more jobs with the people whom we say are the people that have the highest potential to create jobs, and we make it more difficult for them to create jobs by making job creation out of their reach, then we're talking about an utopia. We talk about, if you look at the unemployment stats, 61% of those who are unemployed is young people between the age of 18 to 25. Approximately 40% of them are young people between the age of 22 to 35. We currently have the highest youth unemployment rate in the world. So we need to start balancing our interest to make life better for few and the interest to make life better for all. That's what broad-based Black economic empowerment is about. We have to make life better for small businesses by enabling them to be able to create jobs, but at the same time, we need to balance that interest to make sure that the ordinary man on the street has access to income to be able to take care of their family.
Onyi, some of what you say seems to suggest that there aren't policies in place, and if there are, those policies aren't being implemented. Now, what are some of the policies that impact small businesses that would allow them to be able to grow faster and obviously employ more young people?
So there are a number of policies that already exist to try and support small businesses. One of those policies, for example, is the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act that supports that asks corporate sector to support small businesses in one way or the other. There are other policies that are in place or initiatives of government. But the biggest challenge of small businesses is two things. One is funding, and the second is access to market. Even with the best funding in the world, if they don't have access to market, they will never really be able to sustain their businesses. And so as we speak, Majority of small businesses are struggling to access loans from the formal sector. They are struggling as we speak to survive. If you look at the COVID in the last 3 years, from 2020 to 2023, the amount of small businesses that have died is not just in hundreds. We're seeing an increased amount of small businesses dying and not surviving. In fact, 96% of businesses that start die in their first year. They don't even, by their second year, you see less than that surviving. And yet we want them to create jobs. And if we want them to create jobs and pay minimum wage and increasing minimum wage, then how are we going to solve the unemployment crisis we speak in? We see in the formal sector shedding jobs, not creating it. So where is the opportunity? The opportunity is how do we support those who need those jobs the most to create it?
So what are some of the other factors that we need to look at that results in small businesses failing in their first year? I'd like to imagine it's not because they don't have a good idea.
There are lots of people who have good ideas, but it takes a lot. It takes, just like we say, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes an ecosystem to support small businesses. And I don't believe that we have enough, we have created enough. The policies, I don't want to fault the policies because we have fantastic policies in the country. What we lack in the country is execution. It's around surrounding small businesses and in particular youth-led small businesses. One of the things that we often say as Africa Tikkun Services is that I don't see the reason why we cannot have small businesses solving social and environmental issues. As South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, we have a lot of social problems. We have a lot of environmental problems. That's an opportunity for young people to start businesses. That's an opportunity for young people, for people to come alongside them, to then support them with access to capital, access to mentorship, access to resources, access to market, access to, all the necessary ecosystem requirements that will enable them to build those businesses and then enable them to create jobs. But not just create jobs, sustain those jobs. We want to get to the point that we have one-to-one, every small business creating a minimum of 1 job or at least going up to 10 jobs. We'll start seeing a change in our country in terms of unemployment. The 0.3% increase in the unemployment we saw will be insignificant compared to the jobs that can be created. And that's why we're saying, as Africa Tikkun Services, that as we think about how we make people's life better through national minimum wage, we think about that it's not just the problem of inequality we're solving. We're solving 3 problems. The problem of unemployment, which leads to the problem of poverty, which leads to the problem of inequality. And in your youth population, you've got a problem. You've got close to 70% of them sitting at home, 3.5 million young people, not in education, not in employment, not in training. So we need to look at an inclusive solution that enables everyone to win.
Onyi Nwaneri, CEO of African Tikkun Services, appreciate your time this afternoon.